Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in on this sunny Wednesday. I'm not sure where you are from, but you can put in the chat box below where you're joining in from. Welcome to Business Bites. I hope you're having a great Wednesday so far and a great week. I'm very excited to see everyone joining us for another awesome speaker session. For those of you who may not know, I'm Erica. I am with Hana House in Palo Alto in Northern California. So if you ever come by and see me, feel free to say hi. Just as a quick background, Business Bites is a collaborative virtual series hosted by On Its Axis and Hana House. And eventually we'll have some in-person events at both Hana House in Newport Beach and Hana House Palo Alto. If you're not familiar, On Its Axis is an innovation consulting firm based in Southern California, and Hana House is a flexible co-working space and cafe with locations in both Palo Alto and Newport Beach. So today I do encourage you guys all to use the chat feature at the bottom to engage and ask as many questions as you want throughout the session. As a reminder, the session is going to be recorded. If you'd like to refer back to it, we'll post it on our YouTube channel and send it out via email following up the session. And with that, I will hand it over to Kelly so we can just get it started.
Thank you so much. I was just in New York. I saw in the chat that one of you shared that it was raining, and I was just there actually this morning, and it was beautiful. And so I'm very grateful for what I'm calling late spring, early summer in New York. And I'm tuning in today from Southern California, where it has been a cloudy white for much of the 2023 year, and thrilled to be here for another Business Bites session. The goal of today's conversation is really to talk about how great organizations optimize their build, measure, learn feedback loop. And I'm going to spend some time before we get started too deep on that topic, really talking about the foundational concepts that the build, measure, learn feedback loop are built on and based in. I'd love to hear from those of you who are live, what interests you about this topic, what inspired you to come. And I'm happy to customize today's conversation. But we chose the topic theme, accelerate anything, with real intention, because the build, measure, learn feedback loop is a concept that was really introduced around the idea of venture scaled startups. But it can be applied to nonprofit organizations. It can be applied to internal programs within corporate organizations. It can be applied to change management strategies. The idea of build, measure, learn really can allow for the optimization of many concepts. As we talk about this, I'm going to share a little bit for those of you who may not already know me about my background. I'm Kelly O'Connell, and as Erica shared, I'm an executive leader at On Its Axis, the innovation consulting firm. I also run 360 Venture Collective, which is an early stage venture firm that invests in venture scale startups, particularly tech-enabled startups across a few industries. And I also am a certified nonprofit professional who's founded a now GuideStar Platinum nonprofit. And so I truly have experience with the idea of growth across organizational types. As a consultant at On Its Axis, I've had an incredible opportunity to work with organizations from Fortune 100 to global nonprofits to very small emerging startups. And truly the ideas that are behind this concept of really customer-centered design, human-centered design, they can apply across orgs. And so I'm looking forward to sharing and having a great conversation about this today. Thank you for each of you joining and spending time. I know today everyone has a lot of choices with where they consume content, particularly content related to business strategy. And so I want to welcome everyone, and I'd love to know a little bit about where you're tuning in from, a little bit about your background, so I can customize and make today's conversation, especially the examples, as relevant to our live audience as possible. Now, I mentioned I was going to share a little around this idea of the concept, the foundational concepts that the build, measure, learn loop are based on. And one is that there's the benefit of acceleration in concept to the startup or program growth world. And I want to talk about what it even means to accelerate something. So the textbook definition of acceleration is to increase in amount or extent. The secondary definition is to begin to move more quickly. And then in physics, this idea of acceleration is to undergo a change in velocity. And why I love thinking about this, when I moved to California, in 2007. I was working for a company that acquired Golden West Financial, and it was Wachovia Bank. And I came out to California from Boston, where I'm from originally. And in California at the time, I went from a very pedestrian Boston lifestyle to spending a lot of time on the 405 and 101 freeways and many others along the way, but a lot of time in traffic. And I thought a lot about this idea of acceleration way back then, in the concept of work. Here I was in mergers and acquisitions, and we were thinking about how does a bank, a conservative, financially conservative bank at the time, how does that organization go through the process of entering into a market that they hadn't really been in? They were largely an East Coast based market. They were largely a company that had savings as a way to get people into their higher kind of profitability segments of securities and on the secondary market. And they really weren't spending a lot of time at the time in this idea of mortgage or mortgage lending. And so their acquisition of Golden West Financial, which was a company that was really based on mortgage products. They even had their own mortgage index that they created, the Cozy Index. And they acquired this company as a way to accelerate. But I mentioned that it was 2007. And so timing matters in acceleration, the market and the type of market. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this. Here I was in a new place, spending a lot of time in traffic, what I like to refer to as windshield time, in an ideating stage, thinking, was this the right move for the organization? I was seeing things that I wasn't used to seeing because it was an acquisition of a very different type of bank. And I decided that I was going to learn how to skateboard. So during this period, I relocated, and I knew that when I wanted to get quickly from place to place in what I refer to as the pocket cities of the west side of the greater Los Angeles area. And it wasn't easy to get around on a bike, but I saw a lot of people on skateboards by the beach. And so I love this image and this idea of acceleration because I got to spend a lot of time. The fun thing about skateboarding, and I think it's a great analogy for acceleration, particularly in the first phase of the building, measure, learn cycle, is it is a great example of how there's a lot of starting and stopping. And when I first learned to skateboard in Venice Beach, California, I learned on this big, long cruiser board. And I thought that's better because this big, long cruiser board had more surface area. So I knew I'd be able to find my footing on the board. And I also knew at the time that they were more stable. And so in my mind, a longer board for a skateboard was going to be better. What I wasn't considering were how many people walk on that beach path and how often sand covered that beach path. And so there was a lot of starting and stopping and a lot of me going, whoa, along the way. And so as I think about this concept of acceleration, how it's analogous to this idea of startup acceleration is they're very rapid testing. I would test, pump, and then try to go until it would kind of stop. And then I would start again. And the goal as a startup is really the combination of these three definitions, is to increase in amount what is working, right? So we talk about market traction, to begin to move more quickly. So both through the measuring cycle, so making choices, and in customer acquisition and in customer engagement and converting them from kind of customer lookers or early customer adopters all the way to customer champions, and to increase really the velocity of growth. And so as an organization scales, it scales more like the starts and stops of when I first learned to skateboard initially. But as you begin to adopt the cycle and you begin to accelerate, you can actually undergo changes in succession and even simultaneously within an organization, and still track and learn and scale. And so an enterprise organization has the ability to accelerate very rapidly once they identify fit, and they can identify the ability to scale based on timing and assets that they're able to contribute. And so that's a really important concept as we're talking about this. Hopefully, that kind of story of me skateboarding also makes sense a little bit as an analogy to all of you. Another way to think about this, you may have heard about, is sort of this idea of the hockey stick measurement, right? So at the beginning, there's a high cost of initiation. It is trickier to hit velocity, and it requires a lot more effort to gain your footing. When you see professional skateboarders, which I am a long way from, they just have such ease. Their stroke to create movement, their speed, their ability to rapidly generate speed operates much faster than even me at my best skateboarding capacity. Today, I've fully converted from riding a skateboard. In middle age, I've switched over to a Segway scooter, where I can very simply push a throttle button, and it allows me to move on that beach path a lot faster. But you've probably heard about this idea of this sort of the hockey stick growth. The idea is that you want to be building in the areas where you're going to have the least resistance to gaining traction, where it'll cost the least to create conversions, and where you're allowed to optimize that energy output to result transition. And that's where measurement really starts to come in. But what is build, measure, learn, and why did we start talking about it initially? Well, it's a concept that was introduced by Steve Blank. Some other people have claimed to have introduced it, but it was part of this sort of lean startup model. And the idea was really, how do we go from a hypothetical idea, so this sort of leap of faith that we believe something should be built, that we believe it solves some type of problem, to a company that's operating at scale with traction, with customer success. And a way to get there is to create a continuous cycle that allows us to understand what we're building, why we're building it, and measuring, sort of incrementally testing that along the way. So we go from Steve Blank's sort of lean startup idea. Another way to think about this is that the build, measure, learn process is a feedback loop. It's a loop that begins with an idea, and you're basing that idea on a theoretical customer. So typically, if we want to apply it to a startup, just to use that hockey stick concept, the idea is I've identified a gap in the marketplace, a pain point, a problem that I'm attached to as a founder that I think is being underserved by the current market landscape. And I think that other people also experience this problem. And I believe that if I solve this problem, there is a market viability, meaning that I can solve it in a way where the potential for somebody to pay or acquire my solution outweighs the cost it would make me to develop that solution, and that it's scalable over time, meaning it is something that creates a business model that allows for the effort it takes to solve the problem and to capture that initial sort of customer traction where it starts to create profitability allows me also over time to succeed. And so typically we have a customer in mind. When we think about building with customer empathy, I'm going to come back to this slide. It's a really important concept because who we believe our initial customers are as founders sometimes isn't the initial customer. And this topic of build, measure, learn, being accelerate anything, I also want to give an example of how this can apply to an internal organizational program. So the work we do at On Its Axis, we're often working with enterprise companies, so Fortune 1000 companies and nonprofit organizations. And when we're working with those companies, they don't always have an external lens. They're not always out looking and saying, hey, I'm thinking about creating a solution for an existing customer segment or creating a solution for a new or adjacent customer audience. Sometimes the innovation work that they're doing is about internal employee retention, for example, or it's about a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. And they're thinking about their customer as an internal customer. And this build, measure, learn feedback loop can absolutely apply to that type of internal program development, just as well as it applies to that startup founder who's thinking about, hey, I have this idea, a pain point that I see in the market that I'm really passionate about solving, and I'm going to go out and attempt to discover if there's a market viable product that I can take to market. And then I'm going to learn with the customer. So it's not just about measuring based on a purchase measurement, but it's about truly engaging, having that human-centered design lens to understand through qualitative and quantitative study, is this the right customer? Is what I believe I'm solving for the highest and best use for the customer that I'm solving? Do they also use the product that I've designed in the way that I believe they'll use it? And what do they need next? How do they help me create a culture of continuous innovation with the solution that I create? And that's this cycle. So when you think about the brands that I representing On Its Axis, On Its Axis was designed by Shelly Icona, our founder, really looking at the 360-degree representation on both axes of any problem that was being explored, whether that was an internal or external lens. So it's really taking this build, measure, learn feedback loop and thinking about it as a horizontal analysis of the problem and a vertical analysis of the problem, looking all the way around the cycle to determine how do we create scale. And this idea of acceleration really comes behind the idea that we want to create a scalable solution. We don't want to just build an internal program for 5 members of a 50,000 person organization. We want to build a program, if it's an internal program, that can be adopted and deployed in a recurring basis so that we're getting a great return on investment. And so a fundamental concept, not in the language of build, measure, learn, is this idea of improved ROI or cost benefit analysis. As we undertake this idea of going from concept to deployment, how do we make sure that we're doing it as cost effectively with the highest target audience benefit as possible? And so as we look at this as an idea of going from really this idea stage. So the hypothetical, I've come up with a kind of key principle concept, and I'm then going from that kind of key principle concept, I'm going out and I'm saying, who is that hypothetical early adopter customer? And what's an adjacent hypothetical customer? And can I test them? So introducing this idea of A/B testing. Have I really thought through from the customer lens, this idea of the problem and how they'll be using it. And then I do sort of this idea of determining what success looks like. And so I set that out and I go, what does success look like for that program? And I'm going to use the lens of nonprofit for a second, because oftentimes when we think about that nonprofit segment, we think about cost being a critical element. And I would argue that whether you're a Fortune 100 company or a bootstrapping startup founder or a nonprofit organization, having a lens of fiduciary responsibility, of cost benefit analysis, is beneficial to all of those organization types. And so really thinking about how will we measure success for this idea of what we're solving, and building in those tests is really important. So we go from this idea stage, the hypothetical, and we create room and space for it, and we create it in a structured way. So when we're doing this work, we have a phase of the work that we're doing where we're ideating. And then we go into what's the theoretical build? What would it take to create an MVP, a minimum viable product where we could go out and test? And sometimes that minimum viable product is a slide that looks like this, where we could say, is this a pain point? And when I show you this image of how I'm thinking about solving this, how do you feel? And testing that across a few theoretical customer audiences so we can determine who those high potential early adopters might be. And sometimes it's a different type of early adopter. So using that nonprofit lens, because I think most people, when they think of a nonprofit, it's easy to think about cost being a really important and controlled environment for a nonprofit. And we spend a lot of time in the nonprofit world thinking about fundraising and thinking about how do we make sure that any program that we develop is going to be mission aligned. So it makes sense for who we are as an organization, the audience that we really deeply know that we're serving, because that's part of the nonprofit culture. So we're really thinking about a fundamental audience as a nonprofit organization. And then we're often thinking about, and how will I make sure that I can continuously provide this program, and that this type of program will benefit our intended audience enough that it's worth allocating resources, because we often think about the financial cost of a product, but there's also a resource, a employee energy resource that's expended on developing new programs, and a pure operating cost to deploying those resources and allocating them to new program or new product development. So thinking about the build, measure, learn idea around this idea of a nonprofit, it can really work well in the nonprofit space. So oftentimes a nonprofit organization is designed around one initial program. So let's say it's a health equity nonprofit, like Start Giving Local, the nonprofit that I originally founded. Start Giving Local, I founded to solve my own problem, which is oftentimes something that founders of both nonprofit and early stage startups do. They solve a problem that they're passionate about. I was an endurance athlete that enjoyed fundraising for other nonprofit causes. So I thought, if I'm going to run a marathon, if I'm going to ride my bike 100 miles, if I'm going to do an endurance triathlon, I'd like to do it on behalf of a cause I'm passionate about. But many of those cause-based organizations that I was fundraising for, Team in Training, MS Society, they had a minimum donation amount that you had to raise to participate in the program. Oftentimes it was somewhere between $2,500 and $3,500. And I noticed that it would take those organizations a ton of volunteer and staff resources to have a team participating in these endurance events. And I thought to myself, wow, I'd love to do many of these a year, but I can't just keep going back to my friends and family and asking them to support my fundraising causes. And so oftentimes, and it wasn't just for me that I was experiencing that, I saw a lot of people that I would participate in these events with, they would participate in 3 to 5 sort of races or endurance events a year, but they would do 1, maybe 2 on behalf of charity each year. And so oftentimes, and I also saw people who signed up, but didn't ever get to race day because they didn't hit the minimum fundraising goal. And so the idea that I was trying to solve was other people experience this. The nonprofits do this because they like it as a fundraising channel. It's a great way to engage potentially new people to be passionate about their causes. But the ROI to run these programs was only for the sort of most established nonprofits and took a ton of time and resources for the organizations. And so it wasn't as efficient. And so I launched Start Giving Local to solve that problem. I thought, I'm going to find a way to allow endurance athletes to fundraise on behalf of any event that they're participating in with no minimum fundraising minimums. They can support the causes that they're passionate about. So sign up for the Orange County Marathon, sign up for the New York Marathon, and support World Hunger. And we would help them by deploying that out in partnership with local nonprofits. And that today continues to be one of the program segments that Start Giving Local runs. But we realized as an organization that wasn't getting to the root cause of this idea that is behind and underlying our mission, which is really about health equity. And that's about financial health, it's about physical health equity, and it's about mental health equity. And so we've since launched several programs in support of other versions of health equity. But we wouldn't be able to do that without a lot more volunteers and without really deeply understanding which elements of those problems we wanted to solve. And so anytime we launch a new program, we run through this build, measure, learn cycle. We think about what's the problem that we're trying to solve, and we think about who's going to be served by it. We think about what will it take to deploy this in one market, and then what will it take to deploy it at scale as an organization, and then how do we measure so that we can report back to our donors and so that we can make sure that the program is actually creating the change that we want to see in the world. And from that, we have this continuous learning with each time we're launching a program that we're allowed to then build on and use for other programs. We understand our customers more deeply. We understand and don't have to do the same types of tests to understand how, for example, athletes are engaging and signing up for new races, how they think about their training plans, because we learn. And so maybe we explore, but we're able to make quicker leaps of faith as we launch new programs, because we're learning in this cycle about how our customers, who we're serving, in this case, the volunteers who participate in our programs and the other people that we're trying to reach that don't yet today participate in our programs, we have a better understanding of greater empathy around them. So now that I've shared these examples, these foundational concepts, I'm going to come back up here. I'm going to give you a chance in chat to just share with me, just in chat, if you're here with me live right now, any questions. If you'd rather raise your hand and ask a question live, just about what I've shared about these foundational ideas, before I step forward and talk a little bit more about how other companies are doing this well. Any questions at all? I don't see anybody raising their hands. Susan, if you want to unmute your mic, I'd love to invite you.
I'm trying to understand everything. This is all new concepts for me. But when I start, I have an idea that I feel I can fill. I have a passion about something that will help many people, young people. And so I I know this will work. And I know the market that I have to target. So you're talking about this concept of learn with customers. So I'm already doing it for free, and I'm learning how to do it. And the feedback that I get says it works, it's helping. So now I'm ready to take it out and try to charge or make money on it. So it will continue to help people, but a wider scale. Okay.
Yep.
So there are a couple of ways that I can do that. So I don't know how much.
This is very helpful. I'm gonna share 3 questions that I would have that might help other people understand the build, measure, learn cycle. So most people who start do exactly what you're saying, Susan. It's what I would say is the most resource heavy version of the build, measure, learn cycle. So this is often the case, particularly with service and consulting business. They go out and they do it free with a beta group to sort of test it with a small group, but they test the whole thing. And my first question would be, how did you determine the audience, and how are you thinking about the audience that you're serving?
Okay, so I'm a pediatrician, and the audience are my patients. And I figured this out because the post-pandemic closure of school, we were experiencing a lot of school phobia, not able to go back. And when I examined that further, I found it was because they were unable to read, unable to sound out words, sound out letters. And so as a result, they were asked to perform in school, and it was very stressful for these children. And if mom didn't have a tutor that they hired, they were falling behind. So I started in that way, and I found that from my development, my screens that questionnaires I developed in my office, I found it wasn't just the post-pandemic closure, but they were kids that took a little longer to hear the sounds or process them and use them for decoding or words and reading. And so I said, hey, it's not just a post-pandemic closure. It's just that we need to recognize there's some kids that we need to work a little longer with. So now I'm trying to reach out to the school districts, present my data, and say, look, I'm willing to train your teachers or teachers' assistants to identify those kids who need early intervention, as we call it as pediatricians.
That's great.
In my office, I use the parents, and if it's really bad, we move on to referral for speech or occupational therapy, right?
That's great.
In 1 to 3 months, I've got excellent results. The children score 100 on the questionnaire just from a simple intervention at home. And those that need more, we go 3 months. So now I'm trying to gather my data and get it published in a local journal in pediatrics so I can teach other pediatricians. And that's another market.
This is great. I'm going to pause you for a moment, Susan, because you talked about something twice now that I think is a really important step. And you have a unique element because who you're serving is different than your customer audience. And so you have a build, measure, learn test right now that you can do around your go-to-market strategy. So you've conceptualized the value proposition, and that's the foundational place, right? What is the pain point? And is there enough of a shared pain point with enough of an audience that I can create a solution that brings value to that audience at a rate that makes sense? That's step one. And you validated that. So you did a build, measure, learn loop that says there's a problem, and it's not just unique to COVID, but there's actually an audience that regardless of this moment in time can be served by this. And so that was an observational learning from your initial hypothesis that you then tested and you're testing. And so that's great. But you also have this other build, measure, learn loop test that you're doing, which is around your go-to-market strategy. So thinking about do I sell to the school district, the solution? Am I doing this as a solution that's B2B to other pediatricians? Am I selling to my mom groups? And so you have to create a measurement for yourself around the model and how the business model scales with each of those elements, your ability, like what you would need in order to be able to serve that audience at scale, and what makes sense, because you may end up selling to all of those people, but which one you go to market with first will be determined by your go-to-market test, and thinking about ordering it in the right way to create an authority sales approach. If you already know it's being deployed in the school system, is it easier to sell to the consumer or parent? Or if parents are already widely asking for it, is it easier to sell to the school? You need to ideate to think about what the questions are that are blockers to you being able to grow. And so it's this fun experience. That's why ideas are at the top, because you're thinking about, who am I serving? And you're thinking about, you kind of put together like a brainstorming sheet of all of these ideas. And I don't want you to think that if you go down one path, the other paths aren't possible. It's just you're identifying what's the path of least resistance, so that you can create traction and start to create some of the testimonials you need to be able to scale. And so building out some of these tests, thinking about measuring impact. The other element about this is learning with the customer. And so you said they're scoring 100%. And now I question, is that a customer net promoter score? Like, how did you decide that what you're measuring is the right measurement?
Okay.
And so that becomes the question of learning with the customer. So often as a founder, particularly founders solving a problem you're really passionate about, you're certain, right? You're certain, I know the audience, or you're certain, like, I know what should be measured. But going out and checking with the customer with an unbiased lens about what's keeping them up around fear with the student learner going back to school, what's keeping them up if it's the school about it, with a non-leading question is one of the things that's the best thing you can do in that learning with the customer. And so taking that third-party perspective of not building a quantitative survey or a net promoter survey that's only measuring the things that you think are valuable about the product, but creating room in that learning experience to find out what's in your blinders, to help yourself as you go into the next stage of ideation. And you can start anywhere in the cycle. You may be starting, if you're a corporation, in learning with the customer before you go into ideating what your next programs are. You may start, if you're a corporation, thinking about an internal product. You may be thinking about, or an internal program. You may start with just listening in on the ERGs and inviting them, employee resource groups, to do a presentation to you on the topics that are most important before you even think about what types of programs should be developed. So you can start anywhere in the cycle from where you're at. But those are the examples specific to you, Susan. Those are the 3 questions that I would ask for each of the stages to really think about how the build, measure, learn feedback loop can be helpful.
Can you give me an example for what I've been doing? To be exact, that I'm not missing a kid that gets 100 the first time. In 3 months, I call the mother and ask for the report card, because I want to make sure I'm capturing all the problems. So there's some kids get 100 the first time. I call back, I say, what's your report card, how the child is doing in reading? Those kids that are not doing well, I see back and retest. I give the mother advice as to how to fix it and see how they do. So can you give me an example? I was thinking of going the pediatric route, but I'm a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and their goal is, we've got to test this. I have the data, and we got to publish it and validate it.
Yep.
Okay.
Here's what I would say. I would say, you just gave a great example of leading with the test. And that's okay. There's no criticism. Those things are important, but what you're measuring is what you want to learn, and it's supporting the value that you believe that you're bringing. I would encourage a focus group comprised, and you might do it in 3 separate sessions, but try to find insights across the focus groups. But I would do a focus group of pediatricians, a focus group of teachers, and a focus group with parents, some that are already in your program, some that aren't. And I would have some with student learners that are school resistant or maybe experiencing some disciplinary problems, and maybe some that are high achievers, to really validate that your product is serving the best and only first audience. That's an example. My focus groups, I would do listening. I would say, how beyond the report card? Here's something I'm doing. I'm testing the report card. Teachers, what are other ways that if a student is experiencing fear around school, that this might show up in your classroom? How would you measure it? What are other causes? Just to try to get those insights from them, and then build your measurement cycle. You might see it in acting up. And this isn't my specialty. I have 0 early childhood education experience. And so I should say, other than having been a student myself and doing some projects with some nonprofits that serve in this space, it's not my strength. But I'm guessing, right, that like some examples that I would pursue in a focus group with this audience. And I would, so I would conduct that focus group. I would look at insights, and then I would try to develop from those insights, another market test. So I would test maybe a sentiment, a conversion. So I would put up a landing page with my program, and I would test with some, outreach directly to parents, some outreach directly to teachers to see who might show up to a micro workshop on this topic, to try to get some conversions, just to try to start to understand the audience. That would be an example of a build, measure, learn test that you could conduct around go-to-market.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
Great.
I am invited to present my data and my questionnaires to a large school district.
Great.
So that might be a focus group right there.
Absolutely. So presenting that creates some room for qualitative, here's observational. So create some room for them to tell you about problems they're experiencing post-pandemic in the classroom, just open-ended, don't lead them. See if there's something that they come up with that might be an even bigger pain point. That's a blinder area for you. Would be a great example. And then, a good quantitative, a survey of that audience afterwards, where you get to actually measure their sentiment around a solution. Do they have the bandwidth? What barriers might you not be thinking about, so they're being able to adopt the product? And so these are the ways that we can use this. And I love your question. So thank you so much for engaging with me around this. I just want to check in and see if our dialogue is creating any other questions for anybody else. So let me just take a quick check. Nobody else is raising their hand right now. So coming back to you for just a moment.
Okay.
Susan, does that answer for you enough that we can move forward? Any other questions about the concepts?
No, I think, I'm very excited about meeting with this very large district with the head of education. I'm presenting. I'm very excited about it because they're very interested in this, because they want to implement it in their schools. And now the question comes up, if they like it and they want to implement it, how do I charge for this? What do I do?
Yes, that's amazing. So that's another type of test, right? So it's the market viability test. So you have to be careful, and why the build, measure, learn loop is so wonderful is you have to know. Remember, I was saying at the beginning, you want to go from your idea, the pain point that you want to solve. You want to know what your non-negotiables are. You want to know, how much of my time do I want to be spending on this, solving this problem? What is my kind of path to solution. So how do I measure success, which might be different than what the market might measure? Do I want to create a venture scale product? Do I want to just create something that's a nonprofit program that I can do on the side? Do I want, so you have to answer those questions, and that's part of your business model that you're thinking about. And then you have to think, based on the business model you decide, do you have a strategic partnership? And do you, think, I'm going to create this and I'm going to, success for me means getting one new school district to adopt this a year for the next 3 years. And that's speed. To me, that's a cadence of success for this type of program, because I only want to work on it myself and I don't want to build out a whole team of people. Success for somebody else in their business model that's achieving that might be, I want to simultaneously launch my commercial product with my kind of white label district product at the same time. And I want to be able to build a team, and I want to finish this year with 100 employees, 50 in each of those programs, with a totally scalable product. That might be, if an educational provider launched this program, that might be their dynamic for success. And so I can't answer that just on this type of a call, but what I can answer, how you price it, is based on your business model design and your measurement of what success looks like for you. So if your measurement of success, as is the case with many nonprofits and many early stage startup founders, is I want to get to this revenue marker, I want to get to this profitability marker this year, then you backtrack from that. I want to get to 100 customers. I want to get to $2 million in annual recurring revenue. Whatever that measurement, the financial measurement of success is, this is often the traction success metric. Then you back out that with your, what will the market tolerate? And what does the market tolerate based on margins? And what is the market average? So the compound annual growth rate for the industry, the total attainable market size. There's this idea of scarcity and demand that really comes into this. So these are big picture concepts. And so as we're thinking about all these sort of big picture concepts, the fundamental backbone of this is you're going to determine how it's priced based on who you're serving and the value your product brings the market you're serving, and how scarce that is, and how important it is to gain speed with that hockey stick. So if you want to have slow growth, you can afford to have higher margins and serve a very small audience. If you have a very competitive market space that is, you're just ahead of the curve on serving, then you probably want to get to market leadership more rapidly, and you may be able to price it in a way where you have a smaller margin with a higher adoption level. There's a lower barrier to providing high value to your audience. So it's those things in tandem that really start to come into play. And so I'm going to jump ahead and I'm going to show something here. This idea, the new startup, the new program, it's about your effort of doing business. And it's about your determination of scale. So as we think about your business specifically, you are in an interesting situation because you could
Did she freeze? What happened?
I don't know.
She froze.
Yes, I believe she has problem with connection. Can you hear me?
Hello, Julio. How are you?
Hi, Susan, nice to meet you. I think Kelly has some trouble with connection.
I think so. Mm-hmm. Should we, so what should we do? Get back on?
Yes, we need to wait. She will connect. Somebody, Erica from Hannah House, from Palo Alto.
Yeah.
She's saying Mrs.
I think we should just wait,
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure.
because she is still recording, so we want to make sure that, okay, she just dropped out of the call, so I think she will join back very shortly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Hello, Erika.
Hi, how are you
Sorry,
doing?
I need you. I work with Hannah House.
Sorry, give me 1 second. Right here.
Hi, I worked with you guys in Hannah House in 2016, I believe, or 15.
Oh, nice, nice. Have you been back
When you
since?
start in Hannah House?
I'm sorry?
When did you start with Hannah House?
I started back in February, but I've been with SAP since last June. Yeah.
Ah, okay, great, great. So I think
Yeah.
we have the only company that work with you in Hannah House in Palo Alto. I don't know if after we leave, we moved from California, the Hannah House do the same, but in that moment, at the beginning, we are the only ones. And we
Mm.
had excellent, great times there.
Yeah, it's been a while since like 2015. Yeah, we
We
recently
work
turned
with
20.
Daniel Zimmerman. You know
Mm,
him?
I think so.
He was the second in charge of that area. Then he was first. Now he's, I don't know, in San Francisco, I believe.
Mm,
Yeah.
okay. Sorry, just give me one moment.
Are you operate from Hannah House?
I'm sorry?
Are you operate from University Avenue or from SAP?
I'm from Palo Alto.
Ah, okay. Oh, Kelly's back.
Ooh, someone else.
Kelly's back, I believe.
I am back. Hi, everybody.
yes.
I apologize.
Welcome.
I am taking this from a conference and I'm on hotel Wi-Fi, which occasionally happens when you wear a lot of hats. And so I apologize for the delay. Hopefully you can still hear me. I was sharing on screen, which I think is now not there, sort of a efforting, and I was just sharing, I don't know how much of it you heard, but I was sharing with Susan this idea that if I were to step in, the step that I would take would be a business model innovation, build, measure, learn cycle before I did too much else. That would be my first step, is to really set the measurement of what does success look like from the business, what makes the most sense for the launch of the type of business, and how to grow and scale that type of business. So that said, I'm going to open it back up to questions since we don't have it on the screen. Hopefully you can all hear me still, and I can get a thumbs up if you can.
You can't get back on the screen, the second part that you were explaining?
I am attempting to, but it is not showing. I can't log back in from the computer currently. This is modern life, right? Being on the fly, tuning in from conference rooms. And so I apologize to everyone. I'll try one more time to see if I can log in to Zoom on the computer screen. But if not, it will have recorded on the recording, which we'll have up, and we'll make sure to share that. And Susan, if you link in with me on LinkedIn and just send me a note, I'll send you that visual.
Can you send me your LinkedIn, type in your LinkedIn so I can connect with you?
Absolutely. To everybody in the chat.
Okay.
Sorry, you're going to see me type because I'm doing it from my phone. So. Okay, it is officially in chat and available for everybody. And I'll send over the deck to anybody who's interested. Any other questions? I know we're nearing the end of our time together, and I know it was a little disruptive, but hopefully there was some value up until this point.
Erika, will you share the video of this conference with everybody?
Absolutely, yes. We're recording the session and we will make sure that it'll be a little bit longer than usual for us to share it, but we'll make sure that we share it to the On Its Axis blog first. I know it'll be probably end of July before it's up on the Hana House blog, but we'll make sure to share it on the On Its Axis blog sooner than that.
Let me see if I used to correct it. You said that you will share that by Hana House blog in July?
So it's going to be on YouTube.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and
Okay,
then
so-
after, I think it'll be in a few weeks, we will send out a follow-up email with the link to this.
So when is it going to be on YouTube, please?
Expect it within the next 2 weeks.
Okay,
Okay,
perfect.
so that's when we're going to get the recording in 2
Can
weeks.
you post the email with the link or how that works?
Because you registered for Business Bites via Eventbrite, we'll send you a follow-up email after the event's over.
Okay,
So
perfect.
if it's not being recorded anymore now, right?
It is still recorded.
We'll cut it off, like all this.
We'll cut it.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you some questions. I didn't know it was going to be famous on YouTube. Okay, so can I?
No worries.
Okay, can I just ask her privately without YouTube right
Yeah,
now?
let me stop the recording. Let me stop the recording. Before we do, Erica, if you could just do the normal wrap up.
Yeah, so thank you, Kelly, for this really interesting conversation, and thank you for taking time out of your day to speak with us. And thank you everyone else who tuned into this really valuable session. So we'll be dropping the feedback survey in the chat bar. I will link that right now. And then we'll send, like I said earlier, because you are already registered via Eventbrite, we will send up a follow-up email with the link to the YouTube once it's uploaded. And then any future Business Bites coming up, whether if you're local to SoCal or Northern California, we have a few coming up this year for in-person events. So you can get an email from that too, if interested. So yeah, I hope you guys have a great day. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next Business Bites. And like I said again, I'll drop the survey in the chat box below right now.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank you.